Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you for being here today on the Career 3.0 podcast. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri. I'm your host, and I have a fantastic guest for you. But let me just first introduce myself. I work as a talent advisor to organizations, and I also work as a brand evangelist for some of them. I also work with individuals, being their career coach. I help them rethink their career and frame exciting possibilities that they might have overlooked or may not have had time for. But this is all the more reason why I think that today's guest is going to be talking to you about something you have absolutely no idea how precious and valuable that is going to be. So without any further ado, Meg, welcome to this particular show. Thank you for being here today.
Oh my goodness, thanks for having me. What a great intro music. That gets me really going.
Yeah, and for the audience, let me just do a couple of things because I want to keep this list short because Meg is a tech executive, a board member, a patent holder, a change agent, a keynote speaker, TEDx host, all of that and much more. So there is lots that we are going to talk to her about. And she's also the first generation person in her family to go to college, and she eventually ended up being the president and chief product officer at SAP SuccessFactors, and has also worked in several of the other places like, Saba, PeopleSoft, Oracle, etc. All of that. She's doing a lot of work in advising startups on innovation. So, Meg, clearly we've got so much to learn from you. And I want to start by asking you, what do you want to learn today, and why do you think you want to learn that?
Oh my goodness, thank you for asking that, because that, I think, is the core of how I'm wired, which is it's all about learning and growth. And so what I'm looking forward to learning is both the insights you have from your book about skills and how the future is making us rethink skills for ourselves and skills for the world. I'm also looking forward to learning from your community and hopefully making some new friends along the way.
Oh, of course. And, so I am also putting Meg's LinkedIn, where you can reach her on LinkedIn. And I really suggest that you follow her and read about all the things that she's writing. She's got another place where you can read some of her blogs at megbear.com, all of that. And so don't miss out that opportunity. But I want to start by asking you a question, which I don't think I've had a chance to discuss with any guest so far. You were on this great track. You are doing a bunch of things, running huge global businesses, and you decide to take a sabbatical. What made you want to do that?
Yeah, so this is such an exciting topic for me because it is me stepping out into a lot of unstructured space, which if you know me, know this isn't my normal space. So it actually was a little bit about my philosophy about learning and about change, and that I really do believe sometimes it's important to take time and space to reconnect and to ask yourself a different set of questions than you might be doing. And especially in the case for like myself, where I had a very big global operational job. It was amazing. I had so many great things happen. But as I realized it was time that I was going to leave, I also knew that I wasn't done with my professional life. I'm going to go back and take another big job at some point. And knowing that, recognizing that, number one, I wanted to build a proper framework for what I might do next. And number two, I wanted to make sure I was completely rested and recharged and able to go into another big job, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot out of you. And so I told myself that I was going to really be very clear. I was not interested in talking to anybody about jobs. And instead, I wanted to talk to people about ideas. That's just been transformative for me. So it's been a great opportunity. It's so much privilege. I'd love to talk and unpack that a little bit. But I've been at this for over 30 years, and this is the best gift I've ever given myself.
Are you using this time to learn something, pursue a degree? Are you reading? And how are you spending your time? Talk to me about your typical day.
So first off, I'm really nerdy and also really like mentally structured human. So your mileage may vary, but I will tell you, when I started, I have been without work before and I have looked for jobs before, but this is the first time I said I was intentionally not looking for a job and being out of work. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to build a little bit of an off ramp for me because of the kind of job I had. So I broke up my plan into quarters, and my first quarter was really about slowing down. Now, if you look at what I did in that quarter, it didn't sound like slowing down, but I can promise you, for me, I was slowing down. So I did some professional conferences. I had some board work that I was doing, looked a lot like what my past job was, connecting with people that were in my industry, etc. But I also started building space within that for my second quarter, which I spent traveling. And that travel was all for pleasure. So while there was still a heavy learning component, I went to see new cultures. My first trip to India for fun, I've been to India 5 times, but never to visit the sites and to get more of the history. I went to Cambodia. I did some family trips. I did some things like I ski trip, Hawaii, some beach, some mountains. And I really used that time not only for fun, but for just creating space in my own mind, kind of removing clutter. Now I'm come back from that, and I am now back into this sort of ramp up on ideas. I'm just returned from the TED conference last week, so I'm my brain is stuffed with ideas. I've been doing a lot of reading throughout, and I've been sharing everything I'm thinking and learning along the way, as well as I'm also doing some internal work on, really documenting more of my own personal childhood and journey and history. Some of that is therapy, and some of that is thinking through some ideas and kind of where they started and what I've learned along the entire journey of my life, not just the professional part. So it's been really, really fun. And now I'm in this moment where I'm starting to be ready to ask the question about what does the next step look like?
I completely relate to and support that perspective that you talked about, having to really sometimes intentionally create space to recharge yourself. Because one of the things in my book I talk about is that we are all going to live to be 100. And so when you think about it, that's really a massive opportunity. What are you going to do if, let's say, you started working, the average person starts working at, let's say, 2025? What do you do for 75 years when you think about that? It looks very different from a time when you say, I'm going to retire at 60, I will retire at 65. Or some people say, I'm going to retire when I've made my money and then never work again. Actually, such a myth, because, you need to stay relevant, because you may not work in the sense that you may not be employed, but there's so much you can do. So I wish more and more people would actually leverage that and really take sabbaticals to rethink their career options. So I'm going to spend some time discussing this with you. So let me first ask you, what was the sign that told you that you wanted a sabbatical?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think most people come to that sign by fatigue or exhaustion or burnout or whatever words you want to use, or maybe even a sense of being stuck or not thriving. I didn't have any of those things. And I think it's important to recognize that sometimes it's about opportunistically recognizing the context in which you're in. And the context that I was in was I was at a moment where I was going to leave my operational roles. So that was a separate decision. And against that decision, I knew I would have a lot of people calling me and interested in giving me something new. And I just wasn't feeling passionate about what that would be. It was also a really interesting moment in time. I'm in tech. Everything in tech is all about AI and everybody trying to understand what is the right operating model, what is the actual investment portfolio and thesis. How much are you focused on growth versus profitability? What does it mean to invest in ideas, et cetera? So there's just a lot of frothiness in my industry. And it felt really like a smart idea to get both more educated as well as get more grounded in my own belief system about where growth was coming, what the industry is going to do, and really what does business and humanity and the world need from technology. And I'll give you a hint. It's not fully crystallized in my head, but it is truly clear to me that we need to be thinking more expansively about how we want to leverage tools and technology, because we know that every single thing that we have had as innovations that are transformative, whether you're talking about the web or you're talking about mobile or you're talking about, sort of any of these big jumps that we've had in compute or in how we bring application capability forward, there's always a little bit of a dark side, right? There's the dark side of the mental health crisis. There's the dark side of bias. There's just multiple places. And so I feel like really compelled to be thoughtful about where are the values and what are the things that we want to look out for, and how do we want to do that in a systems thinking sort of way. So anyway, it just was clear that these things came together. And I would say one other thing that came together, and this is, I think, the most important thing for people, is it's important to think financially about the fact that you will want opportunity to take sabbatical in your future life. And in order to do that, you really need to be thoughtful about your own financial plans. And there's a ton of research on this, but I'll just give you like one, soundbite from my good friend, Amy Wilson. Get smart about living below your means and thinking about creating opportunity paths for yourself in the future. So if you're in a situation like mine where the circumstances were coming together, I also happened to be at a moment where I had the privilege of stepping out and not needing to think about where my paycheck was coming from in the short term. So it is a privilege. I recognize it, but I also think that it is available to more of us with proper planning and creating, thinking about future paths and future opportunities, to your point, against 100-year life, right? How do you think about that differently?
And how many sabbaticals should one be planning? Are there better times to take a sabbatical than not so good times?
So here, I don't know that I'm the most informed, and I'm so admiring of people that have come in later generations that think about this more structurally, both, organizations that provide opportunities of sabbaticals after a certain amount of service. So you have a little of a built-in pathway to it, as well as just individuals who have taken the leap much younger. I will say that there's a whole lot of personal things to think about. I mean, obviously, if you're going to raise a family, that's not a sabbatical necessarily. It can be, but it's most often a different stepping out from work, or if you're taking care of elders or these sorts of things, there are different reasons to exit and enter the workforce. And I think they each have their own sort of opportunity and joy and on-ramp path. And so I think that the most important thing is that no matter where you are, you should always be understanding how you can create future opportunity based on whatever it is you're doing now. And so whether that is investing in learning something, in making sure that your network is strong and that your value proposition to the markets that you want to be considered is strong. So all of those things that you're talking about in your book, I mean, you really can't be reactive about these things. You really need to be proactive about these things so that you have opportunity when you need it and it doesn't become something that you're scrambling about at the last minute.
When you think about taking a sabbatical, and just for simplicity, entry-level jobs, mid-level jobs, and at the senior-level jobs, does the duration of a sabbatical change when you take it at an entry-level versus mid-level and at the senior level? Could it change? Or
I think so.
Minimum time?
Yeah, I think so. I think you really should look at the data on what is the on-ramp for finding jobs in your particular segment and your particular category. And I think we need to all recognize this is not the same for every single person, right? I'm at a point where I have like sort of a double opportunity, age-related bias, gender-related bias in the field that I am. That creates a longer window to find the right kind of opportunity than it might be for somebody who has a different set of characteristics in my field. So like understanding that, and we can all like spend time trying to unpack that and make that more equitable. And I think we should, but I don't think in the terms of evaluating your own personal sabbatical opportunity, I don't think that's the place to do it. I think the time when you're evaluating your sabbatical length, you should be really thinking about what are the biases in your industry for hiring for the next opportunity that you want, and how will they perceive the sabbatical. And again, a lot of that can not be about how you take it, but how you talk about it can change in thinking about making sure that you're creating on-ramp opportunities that line up with your values and your goals and your needs, right? And so here again, I think this is a place where there's a lot of opportunity for creativity, but I think it has to be intentional, or else you will find yourself more vulnerable to finding the opportunities back in. So again, I don't think it's as much about length, but it is about making sure that you think about what is your plan, what is your purpose, and then what is your on-ramp back, and do you have the right infrastructure to support that end to end? Recognizing that whatever you go back to do isn't just about your timing and your interest. It has to do with, what's the market doing? What's the environment, the macro environment that you're going to go back to work? And what is your personal on-ramp path, both in capability, network, and brand? And how much do people know who you are, and how much do they know that you're wildly employable and taking a break, as opposed to just somebody that can't find a job? These are important ways to think about how you frame and how you execute a sabbatical.
So what I hear you saying is that it's important to be really planful and thoughtful about how you want to spend your time, what you want to do with it, how do you want to sort of get back to the workforce, what is that optimal time? So financially speaking, and also from a point of view of, do you take the break that you deserve? And then how do you planfully enter back the workforce, which also has the element that you need to shape your personal brand in that. What are some of the things people can do to shape their personal brand on that?
Yeah. So here's one thing that I think takes a long time to get really clear about, but it is the most important thing. At the end of the day, opportunity comes your way with sort of two things. One, your own readiness, and two, the awareness that people have of you. And so again, thinking about, your network is what you give, not what you ask. So if the last time you talked to somebody was to say, hey, I would like you to help me get a job, that's kind of probably going to limit the number of people who are super motivated to help you on your on-ramp. So thinking about, how can you use your sabbatical time, and how can you use your entire time to be more generous, to be more thoughtful, to be more intentional about how you connect with people, to build the right kind of relationships, so that they're not transactional, but instead they're one from sort of mutual respect and understanding. And so really asking yourself, how do you get more people to know you and to know what you're great at? And this can be, you can use a lot of tactics against that, but you really need to make sure that you're doing it with true authenticity to your own personality and to who you are. Some of us, like for me, it's really easy for me to connect authentically in a digital space. I'm very comfortable sharing a lot about who I am and what I stand for. I'm very public in how I share my thoughts and ideas. That's not for everyone, right? But it doesn't really matter. Like, what matters is that you're doing this consistently and that you're doing it with the right intentions. And if you're only doing it as sort of like, what can I get from my network? What can I get from my, what I'm bringing to the world? You're really missing the bigger plot. So my first recommendation to everybody is just get more generous, way more generous with your time, with your talents, with how you show up in the world. And that ultimately will come back to you with great interest.
If you are on a professional platform like LinkedIn, what are some of the ways in which one can leverage their own content to stand out and get noticed? And what's your advice on that?
Yeah. So I would say, first and foremost, be at least 2 or 3 times more interested than interesting. Do be interesting, but first be interested. So my strong recommendation, the thing that works for me, is find people that interest you and get to know them and connect with them and elevate their content and elevate their stories and their thoughts. And in doing that, bring your own point of view forward, like making sure that people understand that you're interested in contributing to the things that they're passionate about because you have something unique to offer. And the combination of those things, I think, are the places where people miss a lot of opportunity, because most of the time when you tell people do more on LinkedIn, they either panic and like start like freaking out and thinking they need to do something, but not actually figuring out how to do it. Or they get way too self-centered. Oh, this is, look at what I did here. Look what I did here. Look what I did here. Look what I did here. There's a time and a space for all of that, but it's much, I think, more productive and fun if you just try to find people and topics and things that interest you and authentically connect and engage against those topics and with those people. And again, this is a long game, but this is a game that pays off because you find your people and they find you. And finding your people is, just expands not just job opportunities, but life opportunities. It brings joy. It brings real depth and breadth to the thinking that you have and the things that you can do in the world. And so I really think that when you're on LinkedIn, make it more about other people and find a way to be much, much more interested. And I think that's going to pay off.
I just love that phrase, what you said, that, it's more important to be interested than interesting. That, yes, I mean, of course you're interesting, but if you're not interested in others, chances are that they are not going to be too interested in you. So I think that's precious advice. I would also love to know, do you have some guidelines of stuff that you do not talk about on LinkedIn? What would that be?
Yeah, I'm exploring a little bit of that. As I told you, I'm exploring a little bit of my own kind of personal history and all of that. And what I'm finding is that, and again, I'm a very open person and I'm fine with people finding things, but I mentally sort of segregate a little bit about a couple things. Things that are sort of my personal journey or things that are less professionally oriented, those I go on my personal blog. Things that are crossover, a lot of what I do and what I care about is crossover. It's about leadership. It's about mentorship. It's about, the future of work, all of that. I do those things. I'm very thoughtful of what I do and don't share about my children. That I wasn't as much early on, but now they're both young adults, and I'm very mindful of trying to think about how I support them. So I don't tend to talk about parenting much on LinkedIn, but I will on my personal blog, unless it's in an abstraction or unless it's a reflection of something that I've done myself as opposed to something about my children too much. That is kind of something that's grown over time for me. And I think the being consistent, I think, matters the most on how and what you share on LinkedIn. Getting really clear on who you are professionally and what you bring professionally, and making sure that you're consistent in how you show up. So for me, humor is really important. And I will show up with a fair bit of whimsy and a little bit of wit. And again, I think that's intentional because I want people to know, like, hey, if that's not for you, that's great. We're not the right fit for each other. Let's not waste each other's time. So helping to make it easy for people to find you and the right people to find you. And then like being okay with the fact that's not for everybody, because the truth is there's a whole lot about me. I'm very direct. I'm very Californian. I don't take things super seriously. These are things that work in some contexts and less in other contexts. And so I think it's important to own that and to say, this is who I am, and make it easy for people to self-select in if that's something that they find interesting or useful or not. Because again, back to even though we're going to be around for 100 years, time is precious. It's the most precious gift you can give to yourself and to others. And you really shouldn't be wasting theirs or your time if it's not going to be adding value at some level.
What I was impressed about your resume was the fact that you are an inventor. You've got a patent. Tell me about that. What was that about?
Yeah, I actually have several patents. So what's interesting about patents? So first off, a career advice moment. If you work for a big company in tech, patent something. They have all the infrastructure and they have a lot of interest in making that happen. So figure out what that means and what's behind it, because I promise you there's a lot that you're doing that is important and innovative. You just have to understand the patent process, which is its own sort of thing. If there's one thing I'm good at in general, it's reverse engineering the kind of substance behind something complicated. So some of my patents are really about that, and some I think I'm really more passionate about. You get to a certain level in your career, if you're fortunate enough, where it becomes less beneficial for you to patent things yourself and more important for you to encourage other people when you can hear their idea to tell them, like, go make that a patent. That's something we're going to do. And especially if you're in anything that has to do with product, you're going to be inventing things all the time. And so the places where, when I was at that moment in my career where I was at big companies and also hands-on enough in the areas that it was clear that I was not taking anybody's opportunity away from them in bringing forward patent ideas, was the early days of social media. So I spent a lot of time thinking about, how could you get more data-driven about people, about teams? How could you get more data-driven about what you understand about people so that you could help find them the right kind of jobs? Sort of early stuff in those areas. And I'm really proud, not just of the, the plaques and the thing, but that I didn't just patent things myself. I made it a personal goal to always include somebody else with me in a patent application so that it could really follow up with my core belief, which is, we are always stronger together. We are more innovative together. And the future is about that sort of intersectional and collective brain power, bringing ideas from multiple places to do interesting things. When I reflect on the patent cycle, number one, it's not as hard as you think. So please make it happen. You can do it. And number two, bring somebody with you. You have a seed of an idea. You want somebody to help you turn that into something that is patentable. Find somebody that has the skills that are sort of, adjacent but additive to yours, and go do it together.
This is probably such a unique piece of career advice that I've heard from you today. If you work in a large place, use the opportunity to patent something yourself, because very few people actually think about it. It also is something that can be a permanent feather in your cap. It stays with you forever, and it sort of rebrands you as an inventor. And I also want to therefore talk about, you do a lot of work mentoring organizations, and you're working in the space of innovation. While your career has been about change and technology, but I think right now it is more about innovation. So what do you see are some of the areas where a lot of innovation is happening, and how much of that is AI driven? How much of that is just really rethinking the world in very fundamental ways?
Yeah, so there's sort of two big meta things that I'm toying around with and getting myself interested and grounded in. Of course, everything is all AI, but I think, setting that aside for half a second, I think the real interesting bit is, I recently read Kara Swisher's Burn book. I've been obviously doing a lot of reading, and she made a sort of passing comment about the way beginning of her career where she observed that everything would be digital one day. And I think that is the foundation of so much thinking. So AI has shown us that we can algorithmically do interesting things, right? We can automate interesting things. We can generate interesting things. We can goof around in interesting ways, all these things, right? But the engine underneath that is really about digitizing so much. I mean, what we're doing right now is digital. It didn't exist, 20 years ago. These kinds of things are really important to think about. So that's like just one set of, imagine a future where there is a lot more data to drive a lot more interesting decisions. And so when I think about what does that mean for innovation, to me, it's twofold. One is about interesting and friction-free data capture. And then the other bit is getting much more data-driven and much more experimental in how we decide what we do next. So in the past, we might have 30 years of work experience, then we know leadership and running teams, then we go execute and be leaders and run teams. And what you find when you look at that arc is a bunch of people saying, well, everybody has to come to the office because that's how I learned and that's how it worked. And so, everybody needs to be in the office or we're not going to be as competitive of a company. And you're seeing that tension right now. That's one example of many where the idea that you know things based on how it worked in the past is going to really trip you up in the future. And so where I think the world is going and where innovation gets interesting is that we have an opportunity to be more data-driven in how we think. That's going to require us to be a lot more curious, run a lot more experiments, and even know how to do that. And to not just look at the results based on how we expect the results to guide us, but to be much more scientific about looking at the results to ask further questions. Where did our hypothesis completely fail? Where are the missing spots? You know, that story about the missing bullets on the plane and the fallacy of that you understand the data based on what data you can see. Start asking the question, what data are we missing? And therefore, how are we missing making a good decision on that? And so as I think about where the world goes in the future, I do recognize that experience is not going to have the same benefit it had in the past. It's still beneficial, but what's beneficial about it is the fluid intelligence and the curiosity. If it calcifies, if you decide that you have experience because you've been successful in the past, you're going to be in a wildly risky position.
How do you work towards unlearning anything in your own case? You know, learning and unlearning are two sides of the same coin. And what is your tip about somebody who says that I've done it like this and I think I'm wrong? With that realization, what is the next step?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. One, I try to throw myself into different contexts to help find what are the heuristics and the biases that I've been leaning on that might not apply anymore. I think that's sort of a useful way to change up your definition of whether that's jumping into a new company or jumping into a new industry or jumping into a new living environment or whatever it is. Like, getting yourself into a different context is a great way to sort of force you to see absurdity and force you to see nuance and change and difference. That's one piece. That's the discovery. The other bit is start building a practice of figuring out where you were wrong. This is one I'm starting to add myself, is looking at things that I have done or that I am doing, things I know, things that I'm thinking about, and try to find the spaces where I'm wrong.
Give me an example of that.
Yeah. So I posted something recently about this where in the past, my understanding about pay bias. So I did a lot of research early on in the gender pay gap. This was, a couple decades ago. And one of the big things that they had come to is that women don't negotiate properly for salary. And therefore that, you start out not negotiating for salary. You compound that over the course of your career and it turns into a very big number, right? So this was something that I had seen research, I knew and was very sure about. Well, it turns out that was true at that time, but is no longer true today. In fact, women do negotiate for salary and new college grads are negotiating for salary, which is fantastic. The thing that is still true today is that when women negotiate for more salary or higher pay, they're less likely to get it. So it's a different problem, right? We need to look at it and say, okay, there's a different problem there. And sometimes it's also true that they do get equal salary and then have a significant pay gap when they go out to have children or whatever. So again, if I had not forced myself to say, where am I wrong today? Again, I can be wrong for all the right reasons. I was right in the studies that I understood, right? But I had new things had happened in that 20 years and I hadn't taken the time to sort of ask myself, are the things I know still true, right? So to me, the opportunity for unlearning comes a lot from making sure I stay informed, even and especially on things I'm confident I know, because the knowing is the challenging bit, right? The knowing, it doesn't mean that it wasn't true at one point, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true anymore. And that's the problem with the idea of unlearning is you have to really be curious and, try to stay informed, but also try to build ecosystems for yourself that people point out when new things happen. So you don't have to do all of this research yourself, that it starts to come to you because you hang out with smart people who ask interesting questions.
What is your definition of an interesting person?
Oh my goodness. For me, an interesting person is a couple dimensions. One, curious and passionate about something. I find when people are really passionate, especially if they're passionate about something I know nothing about, I find that wildly interesting. And then open and not taking themselves so seriously. And I think that again gets to, would they be willing for me to learn from them? Would they be willing for me to get to know them better? Would they be willing to build the kind of connection that I find so valuable in my own journey? And so again, I really find people interesting, not that they're like me, mostly that they're a lot different than me, but open with that difference and willing to share. So passionate about how they came to whatever whatever their thing is, and wanting to bring that into the world for others.
When you talk to organizations, especially startups, now, I know you mentor a lot of them. What do you really bring to the table when what should they reach out to you for? And what is that unique skill that you will bring?
Yeah. So I've been really fortunate that my experience is both kind of strategic, thinking about markets and opportunities and product innovation, but it's also on execution. I've run engineering teams, I've run operations teams. I've been responsible for the end-to-end delivery of important mission critical software. And so because of that understanding, what I'm able to offer, especially startups, is a tremendous amount of context. Because the other thing I can do well is break down ideas into their sort of essence and the simple parts, because that's how my brain works. And so when startups find themselves stuck or curious or really wanting a thought partner, I'm really uniquely able to help. And again, I think in a lot of cases, not just about product market fit or go to market or sort of business strategy, but also organizational strategy. How do you think about people transformation? How do you think about execution of big ideas? Because one of the things that I've had to do is live through multiple transformational moments in the tech industry, right? Changing technology foundations, changing how we delivered software, changing what the customer looked like that we sold to, changing the threat landscape environment with how we think about security and privacy, et cetera, et cetera. And then just the ecosystem, how many different tech elements there are than used to be at the beginning of my career, and what that meant for expectations for users. And so like living each of those life cycles of change, I have a unique empathy for what does it mean to have to change, and how can you help rally teams and individuals to show up as their best selves in those moments of change.
Is there a book that you believe every startup founder should read? A book or multiple books?
Oh my goodness. I would tend to lean on multiple books, because I do think it really depends on what strengths they come. I'm a big fan of getting storytelling right. So the Heath brothers, like Made to Stick, thinking about how you tell your story and how you make that story compelling to others. I'm a big fan on strategy execution. Patty Azzarello's book Move, about like really understanding what things to keep yourself honest about, making sure you're executing on the strategy that you've decided is important, and how you can build those systems in place. And then I am a big believer in just understanding your market and your world. And so I would say I recommend books all the time, but they're mostly tied to sort of behavioral elements. So thinking about potential in your market, potential in your team, potential in your organization, even in your ecosystem, your advisors, your partners, your investors, all of these things, I think really become helpful in getting what you need done.
I wrote a book called Dreamers and Unicorns, in which I sort of really looked at startups as dreamers, and unicorns is when they hit a certain kind of a growth stage, $1 billion. So, though I feel that number now needs to go up a lot, because, there are many people who are doing that. And then there are market shapers, people who change in a permanent way how we live and work and do all that. And they solve real gigantic problems. When you look at that, I found that leadership, talent, and culture are very often the three things which many startups stumble in. They get the product right, because usually the founder has thought about the product and the market and all of that. But these three things, very often they haven't done that. You bring a unique perspective because you fundamentally worked in HR software. What is it that they should be doing to ensure that they don't stumble on issues of leadership, talent, and culture?
Yeah, so I find two big things with startup founders. To your point, like they know their market because they were their market. That's usually where they got the idea. And they're very passionate about the idea that they're bringing forward because that's kind of what caused them to create a startup. But then oftentimes they're still in the learning phase of how to build teams, how to trust the people that work for you so that they can hold up their part of the business plan, and then also how they can also be accountable. And so that's where I pointed to Patty's book Move on the concept of building the right control points so that everybody is aligned on what are you measuring and getting really aligned on what success looks like. And depending on the size of the team, one of the things that really becomes a challenge is that each individual area wants to define their success criteria as just the piece they can control. But as a startup or like anybody trying to do anything interesting, it's the white space in between that's the hard bit. And so what you really need is you need a team, an aligned team that is focused on the mission and how they can bring their talents forward to support the mission. And then getting the right control points in place that are shared metrics, right? Shared accountability so that together you're actually achieving the big things. And I think this is a really interesting one with the way that the market has shifted so dramatically with the zero interest rate policy, kind of going away so quickly. It's forced a lot of organizations to realize that they do not have a good handle and understanding of how and where they spend money and where and how they invest towards the bigger goal of value creation. Each organization thinks of their investment as sort of their own thing and that they get a budget and then it's their job to just do it on themselves, as opposed to thinking across of it's really a shared budget for the organization. And together you're making bets on where to spend money that is going to have the highest return on investment towards the business goals. So getting the team aligned on that, what does success look like, is really the foundation, because that's where you build trust and that's where you build accountability and all the other things we know you need for high functioning leaders. Without a shared understanding, really concrete definition of what your shared goals are, you're really never going to get to those outcomes that you are yearning for.
When you look at pitch decks, what should be there in a pitch deck? What do you look for?
So this is where I think the whole concept of storytelling comes through. So making sure that the pitch deck is clarifying both the market opportunity as well as the competitive differentiation. Help me understand how you're doing anything different than anyone else and why does it matter? And then the unit economics and the financial understanding of how are you going to turn that into a sustainable business? Not how you're going to turn that into something that will have, a spike and then fall off, but like, where is the sustainable business element that is going to happen? And that's really interesting right now with nobody being able to really understand the cost basis for the AI solutions they're bringing forward, nor the competitive moat that you can build with that. So it requires you to be really thoughtful. Yes, time to market matters, but sustainable matters more, because if you build something that's going to flash up and flash back down again, you're not really going to create the kind of value that you're trying to create.
Meg, you've been on the board of Heidrick & Struggles. It's one of the largest search firms in the world. And, they clearly work in the area of talent. You've also done HCM software. What are the missing opportunities? What do you think HR teams, on an average, what are the opportunities average HR teams really should be doing? It's easy to do and they don't do it.
So speaking specifically to the HR function, we spent a lot of years in this industry saying we wanted to get a seat at the table. HR wanted to be heard and have a seat at the table. After, 20 years of thinking about this, I just think that's wrong. And I'll tell you why that's wrong. You're asking to be invited, number one, and you're thinking that you're entitled to be there just by force of function. Instead, I would love for us to shift that just ever so slightly to start to talk about the value that we're bringing as a business partner, really sitting down with the organizational leaders and asking, what are the business problems you're about to tackle? And how can we as HR leaders, people that understand the business and understand the people and understand the legal context, how can we help support that better? So shifting the conversation so that the relationship is one of building on a shared objective, as opposed to having this list of things that we think are important for people that we're trying to convince others to do. So it really falls into my broader philosophy of, if your job is to sell someone that your idea is important or your value is important, you're really working from a deficit. If your job is to find out what is important to someone else and then overlay what you bring uniquely to that, you're going to have a lot more points of shared goals, and you're going to have a lot more fruitful outcomes as a result of that. So I guess I would say that what the business needs more is really open conversations, problem solving. What's the most important thing to do for the business? And every function would benefit from really trying to understand the adjacent functions and what they're trying to do, as opposed to try to convince everybody else about the things that matter to you. The more that you can make it yourself other-centric, the better you're going to be able to run your own organization, because you'll really have better clarity of the context around you.
When you look at the current debate that is there about, should you have everybody back into the office every day, some days, none at all, hybrid, remote, it's a range of options. What is your take? How should somebody go about taking that decision? I don't want to know whether you support this or that, because it's nuanced, it depends on a number of factors. How should people think about it?
So first off, I think you need to recognize in yourself what your own biases are, especially if you're a senior leader. Most of the time, our biases as senior leadership is tied to our own experiences as when we were early in talent, as well as what we need to do our jobs effectively. And so oftentimes the interest in getting people back to the office is because it makes it easier for us. That doesn't mean that that's not something you should optimize for, but you should just be honest with yourself. That's one of the problems you're solving for, is your own convenience. And in doing that, then start asking more questions, not with an understanding that there will be a binary answer, but again, back to this sort of data-driven, more nuanced answer. So far in my own understanding, there's a huge difference between the more extroverted people and the more introverted people on how much back to the office matters to them. This is somewhat obvious, but actually worth spending more time thinking about. There's a huge difference in the types of work people do. People that are inclined to do more interactive work, et cetera, or more creative work, oftentimes feel like without a group, they're just hamstrung. Other people who really need more quiet and focused time feel like being especially in an open office plan, is soul crushing. Somewhere between all of those points, there's kind of a series of Venn diagrams. So the first and foremost thing I would say is understand the nuances and the different populations. Understand the values that you're making your decision on when and how you're bringing people back to the office, and communicate with empathy and clarity and none of this wishy-washy stuff about what your expectations are. But be unapologetic about it. Be clear, because clear is kind. If it is that you're optimizing for your own convenience, you don't have to say that, but you should know that. If it is that you're optimizing for a certain cohort over a different cohort, again, you don't have to say that, but you should know that. And then have some empathy for the other people's experiences and concerns, and speak to them directly. Because if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to say, hey, I know that some of you have a really awful commute and it got worse because you moved, and now I'm asking you to come back to the office, and I'm willing to understand what that means for you, and we can come up with a plan. Or, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about that. Get some audiobooks and use your commute time for learning, or whatever it is. But speak with candor and clarity. Quit pretending that it's just like this broad brush, oh, we need to be more innovative, or oh, we need to track hours more, or whatever. Like, have integrity in how you communicate and have empathy for what does that mean for other people, and at least acknowledge the reality of their perspective when you talk about what your expectations are for work.
When you think about the startup looking for a VC to fund them, is there a way that you should try to look for a match? If so, what's that criteria?
Yeah, I'm sort of new in my forming my opinions on this, but I do already know very strongly, like, you need to be clear what it is you're looking for in investors. Do you need money? Do you need contacts? Do you need advice? Do you need support? Do you need access to a new ecosystem? Any sort of combination of those things. Finding investors that are not just aligned with your vision, but are able to help you with the way that you need help and support to grow your business is important. So, again, the other thing to remember is that investment isn't the same for all cohorts, right? If you have been a successful founder in the past, the opportunities you have for investment and selectivity are very different than if you're brand new. If you're somebody with a deep network of other people that have been successful at starting things, or if you're just entering and you don't have that network, like being kind of honest about what the opportunity space is for you, and then creating connections with the people that are going to be the most fruitful for you, again, long before you need it, so that they understand not just your particular thing you're pitching, but the value that you bring that might be more nuanced or not as visible in that presentation, that they can trust you. Because at the end of the day, VCs fund founders. They fund your story, and they fund the belief that you're going to make what you're saying happen and come to life. That you have the passion and the ability and the commitment to deliver what you say you're trying to build. So finding people that are inspired by that and can naturally gravitate to you and your vision is important as well. So I think, again, as a founder, you absolutely need to get the kind of support you need. People that can support you emotionally, people that can support you technically, people that can support you in opening up doors for you, people that can support you in dealing with the resilience required to be a founder. Those aren't always the same people, but you should really be clear, like, what you need, and make sure that you're bringing those people into your world, because that is the way that you'll be successful. You'll never be successful just because you're amazing on your own.
What is it that you have last learned? What is a skill you built most recently?
Oh my goodness, that is a really good question. So first up, I like to try things that I know that I'm going to be terrible at, because I think there's like both. You can't help but laugh at yourself a little bit, number one. And number two, sometimes you surprise yourself or whatever. So the thing that I just tried recently, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest I created a skill. So at the TED conference, they had discovery sessions, and my girlfriend and I, we did the parkour, which I was epically not good at.
Climb the bear wall.
Yeah, and like jump off walls and jump over things and stuff. That was not at all something I was good at, but I was super proud of myself for giving it a go. And I had a ton of fun and couldn't stop laughing. So that was great. I also recently took up pickleball. I think there's a law that when you're in my age group and have extra time, you're required to try pickleball. And I found it so delightful. So those are on the sort of abstract and goofy things. I think on the other skill side, I have been playing around with coming up with my own investment thesis and understanding how and what I'm doing as far as investing in companies. And I'm early in that journey, but I feel like there's a lot of people I can learn from in that space. And I'm enjoying getting the opportunity to meet more VCs, understand how they look at opportunity, and think about which things I'm interested in investing in and for which reasons, which are more because I love the cause and which I think are more like a really good business opportunity that should be something I pursue. So, and I'm giving myself permission to separate those two sometimes. Sometimes they're connected really close and sometimes they're a little bit further apart.
Well, we are up at the hour, and I just want to say thank you so very much for spending your time. And we talked on such a wide range of topics, but I think there were multiple takeaways in terms of how you should think about your sabbatical. That for me was like something I hope more and more people will start using that and to rethink their career. and of course, all the stuff that you talked about, you're learning from your wide range of experiences. Thank you so very much. Your recommendations on books was awesome. I'm going to pick up some of them. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Abhijit.
Much
I had a
appreciated.
great time. I look forward to learning more from you as well.
Thank you so much.